I'd like to welcome you to this Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting. Now, you'll note that I'm in the chair today. Councillor Raukawa-Tait was going to be flying to Wellington. The fog has delayed that, and as I've had the briefing for this meeting, she has requested that I continue chairing. So and I'd just like to welcome everyone who's watching our meeting from afar. We are live streaming this. And is there anyone here who needs to have their mobile phone on their desk today? If there's any reason you do, could you please let me know? And if not, could all of you please put your phones on silent and off the desks away from usage during the meeting, because it has become a problem and certainly it is noticed for those watching from afar as well. So thank you very much for that. Now, I'll just move to apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Kent, Councillor Tapsell and Councillor Donaldson, and these councillors are all absent on council business. So not good planning on one respect. However, there are many things that call on a councillor's time, so they are at various places around the country. Now, are there any further apologies? Yes.
No, just before those apologies.
Turn your...
Councillor Donaldson is in Dunedin with Trends, yes. And we've been announced that we get Trends back here next year. So one of us had to be there, really, and that's great news for us here in Rotorua. It was last held here in 2016, and we get about 2,500 trade show participants over 4 days, so it's a very significant event to have got back so quickly. So it's great that Councillor Donaldson's down there. I just wanted to put that on the record.
Thank you. That is very good news, and I will actually just confirm where Councillor Kent's at an RMA course in Wellington and Councillor Tapsell's at a New Zealand Community Board executive meeting. Yes, Mr Berriman-Camp.
Oh, yes, and just apologies for lateness for Gina Mohi. We had some email correspondence, and I know she plans to be here, but she's obviously late. Thank
you. Are there any further apologies? No, there appear not. May I have a mover and a seconder? Thank you. Mayor Chadwick, thank you. Councillor Gould. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No, there appear to be none. That's good. Now, urgent items not on the agenda. I'm just advising you, in fact, we do have 2 urgent items to be considered, and both of these are relating to the flood event on the 29th of April, and you'll see this on our screen. One is a mayoral relief fund, and the second is an independent advisory panel to review Nongataha flood event of 29 April 2018. This second one will be considered and public excluded. So these matters have arisen after the agenda has been released, which is why they are on urgent, and they cannot be delayed to the following meeting as they need to be considered and dealt with in response to the current civil defence situation. So I hope that's clear for everyone. Right, I'll just ask for a mover and a seconder for a motion to allow these items to be dealt with at today's meeting. Thank you, Mrs Trumper, and thank you, Mr Thomas. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Carried. Thank you. That the matter of the, number 1, that the matter of the establishment of a mayoral relief fund be dealt with at this meeting, and that the matter of a proposed independent advisory panel to understand the Nongataha flood event of 29 April be dealt with at this meeting and public excluded. So we have already voted on that, so thank you for that. We'll move to the Mayoral Manaakitanga Relief Fund, which is urgent item number 1, and you were sent a report on Stella last night, and there is a paper copy on the desk in front of you. I'll give you just a moment to look at that for those who didn't get an opportunity to read it last night, and then I believe that we've got, thank you, Jill Campbell is here to address the report and answer any questions that may come from that. So welcome, Jill. Thank you. We'll just okay, thank you, Councillor Gould. We'll move the Manaakitanga Relief Fund report be received. Councillor Gould, Mayor Chadwick, thank you. Oh, Mr. Thomas, thank you. All those in favour, aye. Thank you. Ms. Campbell, please proceed.
There we go. So basically, the paper presented in front of you is an opportunity to provide relief to those affected from the 29th April floods. As you go through, basically, it's a synopsis of what's taken place, and from there, looking at council's response to those that have been left affected. This fund is an opportunity for council to potentially fill in gaps where other funders are unable to fill. Looking at extra financial burden, family or personal crisis, and costs that are not covered by insurance or other funds such as WINS. So basically, this proposal before you outlines terms of reference for the fund, and it also outlines the membership of the committee that would assess the applications coming through.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Yes, I'll open for questions. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you for that, Jill. It might be in here, but I haven't speed read it, but the Minister, Chris Farfoy, what we provide here, will this go towards our contribution that they match? Just a question.
So the mayoral Manaakitanga Relief Fund would be a leverage fund. So the funds that would come in from the community alongside council's contribution to the fund would also attract and leverage other funding from central government or other philanthropic sources or other funding sources available.
Thank you. Mayor Chadwick.
Thank you, and it's great to get this just a week later after giving the Minister a letter. But it needed some clarification about the terms of reference and criteria. I just wonder why we didn't just have, and the membership, community boards, because you've got the rural, and we know the rural sector has been affected, as well as the city, but I wonder why we didn't just say community boards, because there are lakeside communities that are affected as well, and that's just, I just think it's better to keep it open for the CEs to consider. I know you want it tight, but I just think on some cases it might be more appropriate to have a either or there, and then we're sure to get some community board and Te Tato representation as well as the other members. Just a note in.
Thank you. Councillor Gould and then Mr. Berriman-Camp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With the report, page 1, recommendation number 2, and the options 1 and 2 on page number 3, do we put options, do we vote, we'll record option 1 or option 2 with recommendation 2.2? Because option 1 is status quo and option 2 is preferred option.
Councillor Gould, I'm not sure you're looking at, are you looking at the attachment? Okay, what
Page 3.
Page 3.
On number 4, it's got options, option 1 status quo and option 2 preferred option on the top of page 3.
That is correct. Those are the two options, although the recommendation, as you'll see at number 2, is to approve.
Yeah, but do we, with number 2, do we approve either option 1 or option 2? That's what my question is.
We approve option 2, establishing. Hope that clarifies. Mr. Berriman-Camp.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. Having gone through it and support the kaupapa and think it's pulled together really nicely, my question is, this appears to be a one-off, and it actually specifically mentions on page 2.4, bullet point 3, it states the date of the incident. My question is the intention that this is a one-off fund, or is this a blueprint or precedent for having a mayoral Manaakitanga fund that can be used in subsequent events? And my further question from that is that if we alter that date, you then have a framework in place should you want to use this mechanism in the future rather than tie it into a one-off?
I think I might let Mayor Chadwick respond to that.
Yes, it was very clear from the minister that because of the declaration, it was to cover the declaration event. And that was the request for the letter, so that Crown agencies could be coordinated to come in and respond to this event. So this is a one-off for this event that we're now in. We've done the response. We're now transitioning into recovery phase, and the recovery phase could go on for a year. So it covers this event. It's not establishing a mayoral manaakitanga fund from now into the forever to help people. The old mayoral fund, it's never existed for 4 years actually, but it used to be to help people catch a bus back to their home if something happened, or all sorts of things, and they thought that the mayor had a fund, and we didn't. So this is just to cover the declaration and this emergency.
Yes, further question, Mr. Camp.
Yes, and thank you for that explanation, which I understand and I'm fine with. But it's just, the point is, it appears to be quite a sound mechanism on first looking for future events. And what I'm wondering is that if the title is Mayoral Manaakitanga Fund, that's quite broad, whereas this is a specific event. So I'm just wondering whether or not you make it specific to this event in the title.
Yep.
But then have a framework should you want to activate this process in the future. Those are my only points.
Valid points to raise. Are there any other questions around the table anyone would like to ask? No, I think, Mr. Berriman-Camp, that the community need to realise that this Manaakitanga Fund is a direct response to a direct event, and it is only actioned and triggered under quite a very narrow band, civil defence emergencies and the things that we have had happen here. And by its very nature, it needs to be a tight response to a significant independent issue, not an ongoing thing, because that's where the community gets confused about what's being funded and why. But I think that there may be some reflection on whether they want to add the name in there, although I think having the date and the mention of the disaster in the report is probably adequate. Okay. Yes, Councillor Raukawa-Tait.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Can I just ask, I did hear, I think the Mayor say that this is an opportunity through this fund to perhaps leverage with other funders. Have we identified who they might be already, and are we putting out some feelers to, are we going to get a receptive, sort of response? I just wondered about that. Thank you.
Yes, that will be part of this process, and other partners are being asked if they'd like to contribute. Some have offered, but they have to go through their processes too, so that's not for me to announce. But I think it has opened the door for others to say, we'd like to give a contribution, and then they're very clear, it's not just handed out willy-nilly, that there are very strict terms of reference and they meet a requirement of this community.
Okay, so, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I just wanted to thank the Mayor for raising the issue about perhaps including the Lakes Community Board in there. I think that would be worthwhile. We do have Hamarana in our area, and there have been some problems out there, I understand, and also at Tarawera. So, I think we all work as a whole, so I think it would be good.
Thank you for that. Now, Councillor Stewart, welcome, and yes.
So, apologies for lateness, Madam Chair. I didn't get a ticket this morning. You can see I haven't got the sling on. Firstly, I'm delighted with the recommendation that the committee approved the formation of the Relief Fund. And whilst I hear the Lakes Community Board, I have had reports to me in the last 48 hours of a couple of people in Western Road in dire straits who haven't got any insurance. And I just wondered whether that, as part of this process, Your Worship, that those people who have been reluctant to ask for help are given some sort of priority and attention is given to their needs. They aren't huge, they aren't expensive, but I just think a knock on the door and I'm here to help would assist. I don't know whether they'll access the fund, but certainly I know that there are people who will. So I'm more in support of. I'm happy to move recommendation as above.
Thank you, Councillor Sturton. I think if you could forward those names to the Welfare Service privately, that would be good after the meeting. Yes.
I think that raises an issue, you're quite right, that we're finding in the recovery centre now, that people haven't still registered. So the insanitary houses have gone up to 95 today. So you can see how it's creeping up as more and more people now do reach out, whether they've got insurance or not, whether they feel that they need help or not, they don't know still what help they need. So it's really important for all of us to tell people to register, just register, and then the welfare team can gather their needs, and this would be coordinated with their questions. They've now rung everybody who's declared insanitary, their houses, and then finding out if they need housing, and then after that, the other needs are being met or considered that they're giving on that call. The welfare team then comes in, and that's where MB and others come in. So it's critical that we ask people, and you'll all meet them, please register with council or the 0800 number.
Okay, well, if there's no further comments around that, I will ask that the number 2, that the committee recommend to council to approve the mayoral Manaakitanga Relief Fund terms of reference and assessment committee membership, and that is attachment 1B. I have Councillor Sturt has moved that, and Mrs Trumper has seconded. Thank you. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Are there any other, and the second urgent item will be considered in public excluded, and I just wondered, are there any other items of urgent business? Councillor Raukawa-Tait.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, the second item, obviously it's looking at the flood and possibly, yes, I suppose I'm not sure if it's in a debrief situation, but is it necessary for that to be held in public excluded?
Yes, it is. Yes.
It is. Thank you. Take your word for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we move on to the confirmation of minutes, and these are the minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 12th of April 2018, and that's page 7. And I'd like to ask for a mover. Thank you, Mr Berriman-Kemp. Thank you, Councillor Gould, for the motion that the minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 12th of April 2018 be confirmed as true and correct. Are there any corrections to those minutes? No. Or in that case, I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. We move now on to staff reports on page 12 of your agenda. And recommendation 1 is the vesting of Forest Place as a public road. I'll just call for a mover. Thank you, Councillor Gould, and a seconder. Thank you, Mr Berriman-Kemp, to receive the report. 1, that the report vesting of Forest Place as a public road be received. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. And Stavros is going to answer any questions, should there be any questions from that report. Yes, Councillor Sturt.
I know the roads pretty well in the industry that I'm involved in. With the vesting of it, which I have no objection to, will it be maintained in its special character that it has at the moment? Because it was formed as per the report with cobblestones and other really nice aspects that set it apart and give it that lift. So I just wondered if it's going to be maintained in its current way.
That's a good question. So
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, Councillor Stewart, once it's vested, it's added to our assets, is depreciated and renewed at the current condition and the nature of the road. Thank you.
That's now Councillor Gould, you have a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With Forest Place, we're talking from the first part of Rotorua Road right through to that U-type, right up to the top of the U part, or was it just the U part we're talking about to the bottom of the old part of Forest Place?
I'll refer you to page 17, attachment
Okay.
2. There is a map and it is
U part.
colour-coded specifically so you can see the access off Rotorua Road, the first bit of Forest Place. Mr Michael, is that already under council? Because the blue bit is the bit that's being vested and there's a yellow access way to what appears to be a tennis court, and that is excluded from this. So I think that the map on page 17 is quite clear.
So the yellow part, definitely council doesn't control because it's an access to
Exactly.
a tennis court?
Yes, it's private, yes. So, yes, Councillor Raukawa-Tait.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I note that it was established as a private road and it was owned by the 13 residents there. When it's vested in council, does that mean that we pick up the ownership of that road or merely just the maintenance?
Both,
Both, ownership and...
yes,
Right.
yes.
So that's just a paper transfer, there's no changing of money that we buy it or anything?
No,
Thank you.
no, and we do a similar thing with slip lanes behind buildings and that when we take them over, or access ways. Council often takes those over to provide better condition and a surety of use for the public. Now, Mr Berriman Camp, did you have a question? Yes, and then Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions. Firstly, what I'm interested in is the precedent that this sets. I do understand that this situation seemed to come up because an exception was made back in 1998 or whenever it was. But of particular interest is a request, what other private roads are there within the council's area that potentially could go down this route, to get some sort of idea of potential impact in the future. Obviously, from Te Tātou's perspective, we're particularly interested in marae access roads. I'm thinking about Upper Moana Marae, which is actually off Tarawera Road as well, and has a number of pensioner flats, and Papakainga as well. So my first question is, are we able to get an idea as to any further private roads that potentially could become, under council control and council maintenance?
I'll ask Mr Michael to address that. Thank you.
Madam Chair, yes, we have a very good geo mapping of all public and private, roads and Maori lines, in the district. I would bring to the attention of the committee that when we are agreeing for a private asset to be vested to the council, the policy is that the asset has to be at a condition that will not disadvantage a public ratepayer, in the future. In this particular place, we have inspected structurally and visually, the site, and we're satisfied that, the public will not inherit a deficient asset that will burden, the general ratepayer. Council has always an open policy which says if a private road is wished to be vested to the council, that private road needs to be brought by the current owners up to a particular level that meets a code of practice, and from there council can take it over, because obviously that becomes a stewardship responsibility of the general public. So a long answer, but we have a good knowledge of what the private private roadways are. However, we simply have to maintain the policy where a private asset is brought to a particular standard before it's vested to public stewardship.
Thank you for that answer, which I understand. Is it possible to get that list? Because what I'm wondering is that there may be a number of entities that might be quite interested in pursuing that. Certainly, I'm aware of a couple of marae that have repaved roads recently, I assume up to standard. Wee bit like our previous conversation, they may not even realise that this opportunity is available.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, certainly we can get that in our schedule.
Yes, councillor Sturt.
There is one exception to what Stavros has said in relation to Maori road lines. Having been involved in the vesting of Maori road lines over a number of years, out at Oahu, Dixon Road, Upper Moana, and several other, what happens there is that's the exception where ownership does not transfer to council. A trust is formed by the landowners, who then form that trust and vest access to the council for the council to maintain. We've got one coming up shortly in Ngātai Road, Ngātai Ave, whatever they call it out there, at Nongataha, and I know Monty's playing an integral role in going before the Maori Land Court to do that particular thing. It's not done willy-nilly, it's done through the Maori Land Court, and it's quite a lengthy process. So
Thank
I
you.
just thought I'd make members aware that in this case it's European title, and you're quite right, Madam Chair, to point out that the beginning of Forest Place is already vested in council. Thank you.
Thank you for that update, councillor Sturt, because they are quite distinct processes, yes. Mayor Chadwick.
A question and a thought, really. With us being in recovery phase, would Te Tato accept that this isn't the top priority? Our engineers are just trying to put a roading infrastructure back and build a resilient infrastructure. I think it is of interest to you, well, all of us, because this is big. You've asked a question which is far wider, but in terms of priorities, I just urge that we understand that we're in recovery phase at the moment, and even that request puts stresses on a department that's trying to rebuild roads. But I'm sure you understand. But I think it's worth noting we can often ask for stuff, but the capability to respond might annoy us politically. But just be aware of this phase we're in.
Thank you. Councillor Raukawa-Tait.
Thank you, and I'd like to support your worship in the request, in your observations. But I also say, in terms of that kaupapa that's just been raised, that requires far wider discussion at some stage, and because there is some history as to the inconsistency which the requests from Māori have come forward to the council and have been in the way they've been received and managed. So I think it's a far wider debate to be had at some stage in the future. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. There's no further questions, no further discussion on that. I'll now ask for a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Gould and Mr. Thomas. Thank you. That number 2, that recommendation 2, that the committee recommends to council that Forest Place be vested in council as public road and maintained by council. So we have a mover and a seconder. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Now, recommendation 2, and this is on page 18 of your agenda, and this is the proposed remit to Local Government New Zealand's 2018 Annual General Meeting. And I'd like to call for a mover. Thank you, Councillor Raukawa-Tait. Thank you, Ms Mohi, to receive the report. Recommendation 1, that the report proposed remit to Local Government New Zealand's 2018 Annual General Meeting be received. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Now, I've got Una Hopkins here, and she'll answer any questions that may come from that report. Mayor Chadwick.
Just for wider councillors' interest, Equip are running a seminar online about climate change that I think if you could circulate that to all councillors, and it's certainly something that I'm glad we just unanimously supported, because just even with this last event, we're highlighting that we've incurred up to $5 million damage. So, we cannot ignore climate change. And we're asking for assistance because our funding tools just don't stretch. and yet we are all very aware that stormwater, drainage, and the costs to developers and the costs to council are getting so much bigger. So this is a very important remit and will be not hotly discussed, but it will immediately fall to the funding tools of council to meet and remedy catchment-wide infrastructure needs that are impacted on by climate change. So very topical that this has come up after, on day 12 of our recovery from a massive event.
Yes, and I think for many communities, it's not simply a matter of if, it's a matter of when it's going to occur. Now, are there any questions? Yes, Ms Mohi.
Oh, kia ora tātou. Not so much of a question. I think it's a great remit and it's fitting. It fits with what we've just experienced. So I think it's smart for us to support that. I think there's a further discussion to be had later when things calm down. That I think this remit probably doesn't go far enough, although I'm not suggesting that it be amended or anything, but I think perhaps that's something that might come in when we move into confidential, around this is a long-term strategy to address climate change, but I think what we need to perhaps be cognizant of is this: how do we deal with the actual events in terms of infrastructure? I think it's something I raised at our the urgent meeting that was called last week, and I have noted that the Auckland City Council and the Greater Wellington Regional Council have moved towards development of policy into green infrastructure, and it's something I'd love to sort of table as a discussion, a future discussion piece for this council in terms of how do we move into these alternative ways of dealing with stormwater and shift our thinking in terms of the rush it off and get it off into the lake versus looking at ways of storage on the land using natural ecological processes. And from some of the international readings I've had a look at, there's actually a lot of cost savings in moving towards green infrastructure. So I'd like to just, I have some papers here, I'm sure that's something I'd like to pass them on, or it's a piece of work that the staff will do. But I think it's an important strategy in terms of the work plan that the LGNZ is moving towards in terms of climate change and the Three Waters project that they're working towards. I think it fits really well with all of that.
Thanks, Ms Mohi. I agree. It's a deepening conversation that really the whole country's really only getting to grips with. Yeah, Councillor Gould.
I'm happy to move recommendation number 2 because it is very, very important for this council for future. We've got to protect ourselves for any climate change in the future and try and get as much funding as we can to support the needs of our residents.
Thank you, Councillor Gould. No seconder. Thank you, Councillor Sturt. No? Do you have a question? Yes. Yes, you ask your question.
I, like many around the table, I'm not 100% comfortable with local government leading the charge in terms of climate change. However, the government is leading that wider debate, which I'm pleased about. I don't want to be seen to be jumping the gun because this is very, very science focused, and things are changing and we can't deny that. However, the response, I think, has got to be, I think the remit will set that discussion up, but with its specific issues of telling the banks that we're not interested in fossil fuel investments. I don't know whether that is going too far or not, because I'm not worldly in terms of the debate and the discussion here, but I am happy that the motion go forward because I think we need to be at the table because of the implications that we've all seen, not only in Rotorua but nationwide, and in the Pacific, more in the Pacific. And I see the government moved just recently to increase its focus on Pacific overseas support, because of the impacts of climate change in terms of places like Tuvalu and Tokelau's and places like that where climate change is having an adverse effect on their ability to actually live in those islands. So there will be implications for New Zealand because some of them are New Zealand protectorates. So I've got mixed views in terms of where we're heading with this, but I'm happy that we're at the table to have the debate, and I hope that we as a council can have some input into the wider debate when it occurs.
Thank you, Councillor Sturt. Mr Berriman Camp, and then Councillor Raukawa-Tait.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Not a question, but more to talk what Councillor Sturt was saying and maybe give some assurance. I find it interesting. In my day job, I got to attend the iwi Chairs Forum in Whanganui last week. The Potaia, the environmental iwi Chairs presentation to Minister Davies had 2 slides. Those 2 slides were fresh water and climate change. And interestingly, Gina's got the LGNZ plan here, and actually on page 22 and 23, the actions are Water 2050 and climate change. So in fact, I think what Councillor Sturt outlines is quite key. There are a number of entities and agencies moving into what's our response, how do we think. I don't think the council or councils are on their own in that space. Certainly one of the rather brave resolutions that was passed was the iwi Chair support moving to no greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 across all sectors, including dairy. So there's some big moves happening to address climate change and address fresh water as well. So I don't think this council will be on its own.
Thank you, Mr Berriman Camp. Councillor Raukawa-Tait.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'm certainly going to support this recommendation. First of all, in 2 organisations that I belong to, I'm on the board of, and we have given a very strong directive to our funds managers where we want to see our money invested, and we're not waiting for anybody else to tell us to lead the way or anything. We're taking the lead. We do care, and we're certainly very careful now as to where our money is being invested. So I'm just saying I do support this, and I can see the reason why. And good on the local government, Government New Zealand, for putting this forward.
Thank you. Mayor Chadwick, yes.
So you know, Mr Berriman Camp mentioned the LGNZ. That is our organisation, and they have a policy committee and a governance committee that agreed what are the big issues that they take to government in the next 3 years. It's top of mind. Because right throughout New Zealand, infrastructure costs, we're bleeding, and we don't have the tools to fully fund the replacement costs on our own. Neither our own or regional councils. So the governance and policy team, not on their own bet, have gone back through the sector, through all the zone meetings, and that's why this is the top policy issue for LGNZ, along with the 3 waters, and actually electronic voting, but that's another day. But we would be. It would be very peculiar if we didn't support this, but the debate will be really interesting. And then your issue, Councillor Sturt, about just how far you take it in terms of policy is the next phase that has to be developed.
Thank you, Mayor Chadwick. Are you happy to second that
I'll second that.
recommendation? Thank you. No further questions? Well, I'll put that recommendation to the vote. That the committee recommends to Council that the proposed remit, climate change investment issues, be supported at the Local Government New Zealand Annual General Meeting in July 2018. I have a mover, Councillor Gould, and seconder, Mayor Chadwick. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Now, we move into a resolution to exclude the public. I'll just let you know why thank you, Councillor Sturt, thank you, Councillor Raukawa-Tait. We need to move into public excluded to consider 2 reports and 1 urgent item, and these are, the first is the provisional local alcohol policy, and the reason for, I'll list them all first. Second is a design contract for the Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre, and the third is the proposed establishment of an independent advisory panel to consider the recent Nongataha flood event. Now, they will be considered and public excluded because to maintain effective conduct of public affairs through protection of such members, officers, employees and persons from improper pressure or harassment, to maintain legal privilege, and to enable any local authority holding the information to carry on without prejudice or disadvantage negotiations, including commercial and industrial negotiations, and to protect information where making available would be likely otherwise to damage the public interest. So I have a mover and a seconder, Councillor Sturt, Councillor Raukawa-Tait. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. So we'll now just have a 5-minute break while we move into public excluded. Thank you.